Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Neil Hudson-Basing. I'm the Corporate Events Manager for London South Bank University, and welcome to another fantastic lecture as part of the LSBU Business School Professional Lecture Series. Today, our lecture is entitled Economic Crises, Recessions and the Employee Experience in SMEs. And before I hand over to my colleague Rea, I would just like to take you through some virtual housekeeping, if that's okay. So first of all, we have a respect and dignity statement. So everyone speaking at or attending an LSBU event, whether in person or virtually, should be treated with respect, dignity and courtesy. LSBU operates an environment built on equality, inclusion and acceptance. We value contributions, feedback and comments and wish to create a space for sharing, learning, celebrating and bringing communities together. LSBU does not tolerate any form of bullying, abuse, harassment, or discrimination. Inappropriate behaviour, including that potentially impacts or contradicts LSBU's reputation and values, will be treated seriously and acted upon. Anyone exhibiting any example of this behaviour will also be removed from the webinar. We want our events to be an enjoyable, safe, and warm experience for all. Thank you for adhering to these guidelines. So just to take you through the Zoom functionality, we are in Zoom Pro, which is a general meeting, so you can turn your cameras and microphones to get involved in the Q&A later. Please do feel free to use the chat box to share your thoughts and comments throughout the event. We like to enable a little bit of networking and help us to all break down that virtual wall we're experiencing at the moment. I have enabled closed captioning, so you can see the subtitles popping up. To hide those or to enlarge them, simply click the up arrow next to the CC live transcript function at the bottom of the screen, and you'll be able to either hide them or enlarge them. When it comes time for Q&A, please do feel free to pop your camera on to ask a question. We'd love to see you, but alternatively, please use the chat box if you're more comfortable. That's all from me. I'm in the background throughout the event. If you have any questions, Rea, I'd like to hand over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Neil, for this introduction. And thank you everyone for attending today's event. I'm very pleased to be here with you to be discussing economic crisis, recessions, and the employee experience in SMEs. Hopefully you can see my screen. And if you can't, please just let me know, Neil. So as Neil said, this is part of the professional lecture series that we offer at LSBU. I'm an associate professor of human resources management, and my area of expertise is employee voice, quality of working life, working conditions, and I have done significant work around economic crisis and austerity environments, austerity contexts. So today, what I wanted to do is to briefly go through the economic crisis of 2008, a couple of things. We don't want to go into detail. We all know kind of the history with the economic crisis, mention issues happening with COVID now, specifically linking into how SMEs are affected and the type of strategies that they implement to overcome difficulties imposed by economic crisis and recession, and link this with the impact on employees within these SMEs, and to discuss what they can do, to minimize the impact, the negative impact that this external environment is imposing on employees, and the reasons for which they would feel that there is a benefit for them to take care of the employee experience within smaller enterprises. So I'm going to start off by just basically very quick overview of the global financial crisis. We know it started in 2008. And the IMF at that point said that the year following the start of the crisis, economic activity declined in half of all countries in the world. We know that the economic crisis of 2008 had a global effect. However, the impact was not exactly equal across economies. For example, the European periphery, countries such as Greece, Ireland, Spain, Portugal, had the biggest impact in comparison to, for example, the UK, France, and Germany. And they experienced an employment decline of almost 10%. So, and in some of these economies, this percentage was very, very high, particularly among younger workers. Because of the fact that the crisis has not had an equal impact, different economies responded differently as well. And some of them imposed very harsh austerity measures. So these countries that I've mentioned in the European periphery are examples of such economies that impose very harsh austerity measures. And in comparison, you have other economies that were institutionally stronger. And because they had employment policies and strong employment protection and the strong industrial relations and social protection, they managed to implement labor market policies that compensated employees working less during the crisis. And someone might say, look, oh, 2008, that was a long time ago. Why are we talking about the global financial crisis still? Well, the impact for many economies has been ongoing. They haven't managed to bounce back. The weaker economies have not managed to bounce back. And the IMF recently published a report that acknowledges that there is a lasting effect of the crisis in those weaker economies. And these effects, for example, include lower fertility rates, migration from one economy to the other, and income inequality. So it's not just the immediate impact of the financial crisis that started in 2008 that maybe stronger economies have managed to overcome, but weaker economies do experience these lasting effects. Then if we think about this kind of context that was already affecting a lot of economies around the world, we have COVID-19 that came into the scene back in December 2019. And we know from media and stories the impact of COVID. It started as a health crisis, but it is a severe economic crisis now for the global landscape. Information from the World Bank just last year was that the global economy plunged into recession and recorded a 4.3% decline. And just today on BBC News, there was a report that the UK economy in the first quarter of 2021 has gone down by 1.5%. So there is an immediate kind of impact of COVID. And of course, similarly with the argument about the economic crisis, one needs to wonder the extent to which these economies or all economies will manage to recover after COVID is manageable or becomes manageable. And also to ask ourselves which economies are likely to struggle more and how longer will they have to work to overcome the economic impact of the pandemic. So the impact of COVID on businesses has been described as one of the worst economic recessions since World War II. So that gives us an indication that it's likely to be even worse than the 2008 financial crisis. And again, the countries that were affected most were the ones that were relying on global trade, on tourism, on commodity exports, and on external financing. So again, there is an inequality on the impact that we are expecting to see. So linking this kind of context specifically to SMEs, these are small companies up to 250 employees. And what happens when there is a crisis, economic crisis or recession? Obviously, there is a drastic drop in demand for goods and services, and especially with COVID, it has been, specifically severe, very, very severe because of the lockdowns and the kind of total stop in trading. So this obviously affects cash flows and access to finance becomes very, very difficult. The added complexity with SMEs is that they are already vulnerable even before a crisis has occurred in this way. They are already very vulnerable to deal with external influences of this kind because they are already small, and some strategies that perhaps might be available for larger organizations might not be available to smaller ones, such as downsizing. To downsize, you need to have a certain size. If you're already a small company, maybe downsizing is not an option for you.
Sorry, Rea. A couple of people have said in the chat box that they're having problems hearing you. It's fine on my end, but a couple of people are saying it's quite faint. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, I did all I could with my microphone. I don't know why this is the case, to be honest.
Yeah, so yes, same. I can hear completely fine.
I can see the microphone is all set up.
Yeah.
The sound is, and it, yeah.
Yes. Okay. Carry on. We'll see how we get on. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. So SMEs are already vulnerable when it comes to an impact from an external crisis or recession. So they're difficult to downsize. They're already small. They're less diversified or have an ability or don't have an ability to diversify easily to reduce the risk. They have weaker financial structures, and this includes lower and or no credit rating, or they are very heavily dependent on rating. And of course, those SMEs that are part of global value chains are even more vulnerable because they are bearing the brunt of what's happening with larger organizations. So when it comes to a context such as this one, what usually happens in smaller firms, okay, my computer is, okay, there we are. What usually happens in smaller firms is that the first thing they try to do is cut down on costs. So this is like the strategy that most SMEs and larger companies use, but here we are focusing on SMEs. They want to reduce costs. So they try to downsize if they can, as we said, depending on their size. They try to restructure. They implement layoffs. They implement pay cuts. They might freeze recruitment. And then they also look at all these other HR activities that are good to have, such as training and development, but that cost money to deliver. And they cut down from all these extra things that are great for employees in an organization. So, considering the turbulent environment of an economic crisis, you these type of cost reductions happen at an extreme level. And I'll give you an example. In the Greek economic crisis, the public sector employees had to take a 50% pay cut. So we're not talking about a small percentage of your salary being reduced. It might be taken to an extreme level because of the way businesses are unable to respond to the kind of pressures put by the external environment. So, and the same for layoffs. It could be massive layoffs, and other types of cost reduction strategies. So as an employee, when you are within this environment and you see people around you being fired, um, you are afraid of losing your own job, you see, for example, that your pay might be reduced, there is a negative impact. And even though you might still be employed, there's a negative impact that you experience. And this is in terms of job insecurity, work intensification, because more people are being laid off. You are asked to work harder, extra hours for less money. Um, and usually, when there is a crisis such as this one, you tend to see leadership figures in businesses become quite authoritarian. There is hierarchical decision making, and that might also include abusive leadership styles that creates tensions in employment relations in between of colleagues, in between of employees and managers, employees and owners, and that might be also including bullying as well in the workplace. So overall, there is stress, social, organizational, lots of specific job stressors taking place, and all of them have an impact on physical health and mental health. So the outcome here is that this the basic equation of motivation, commitment, productivity, performance that we talk about within HRM is severely and disrupted. It's severely disrupted because the employees cannot feel this motivation, cannot commit, cannot perform, cannot be productive. And this is not something that the SMEs would can it's something that the companies would need to address, and I'm going to get to this point in a moment. Now, the added challenge with SMEs is that unless they are of a larger size, they are unlikely to have a clearly defined HRM function. So this means that they might not have the internal specialism or expertise for people management issues. And I've done work with a colleague looking at managing people in SMEs in turbulent contexts, and it's from all the different contexts that we study, we get to see that when there is when we don't have the presence of an HRM function, what happens is somebody's doing HRM, and this is usually the line managers, or this is usually the owners. So it's quite informal. And questions for us to ask is, to the extent to which the owner or the line manager would know how to perform the HR activities. So without having perhaps the background or the specialism or the knowledge, how is HR really performed in SMEs? So this is an added complexity within the environment of SMEs. So getting to the point of thinking about crisis, the impact on SMEs, the strategies they implement, cost reduction strategies, the impact on survivors, this added challenge of having a lack of internal specialism, sometimes or most of the times, especially in smaller SMEs. Why should we deal with the issue of survivors? Why should we care about the employees that remain within an organization in a time of turbulence in this context of cost reduction? And here comes the kind of principle of happiness and well-being at work. These are concepts that have been heavily studied in the literature, in the academic literature, because if people are happy, if they're feeling, well-being, they're likely to be more engaged. They're likely to be more enjoying what they do. It links with motivation, satisfaction, commitment, involvement, morale. And of course, the outcomes are multiple there. Creativity, proactivity, motivation, health, productivity, lower absenteeism, lower labor turnover. So it is a good thing to have a happy workforce, a workforce that is feeling well. And I've put a link there just to demonstrate that the media is talking about these concepts of happiness and well-being quite a lot. And this is just an example from The Guardian that was talking about, the importance of well-being and happiness. And it's not just in the media. There's a big kind of stream of research in academia looking around how we can, create happy workplaces. And this becomes even more important when you are in a turbulent context. The external context is making so many changes. There is so much stress. The business is struggling to survive. Employees are very insecure. So this becomes quite an important feature to enable SMEs to overcome challenges. If they could make employees feel happy, have this feeling of well-being, it's going to be a win-win situation. The employees will be happy. They are likely to perform better. And the business is also going to benefit from this productivity at a time where they need it most because of the turbulent environment. So what can employers do about it? The first thing I want to show you, and of course there are so many theories out there. One of these models on well-being is by Guest, but I wanted to show you this because it nicely presents 5 areas of well-being and sort of indicates next to each one what employers could do to create an environment that is positive for employees. And you can see that it incorporates a lot of rewards here, but also financial rewards. It's the environment as well. It incorporates engagement at work and voice and organizational support. It incorporates training and development, recruitment and selection. And it's like a model just demonstrating the different areas that employers can focus on to create well-being within their organizations. Now, looking at these areas, of course, I think we need to think about how many of these areas can a small company really work on, can really invest in, taking into consideration the context. We're talking about recession, we're talking about austerity here. So some of these things will have a direct bearing on costs if you want to implement them, and some of them will have an indirect cost, and some of them will have a direct and indirect cost, in thinking of which ones of these kind of strategies would be more appropriate for an SME context. And this is where I want to present to you the findings from a range of work that I've done in the previous years with colleagues that is dealing with specifically trying to find strategies that might help organizations overcome the crisis from an employee perspective in a turbulent environment. And There are three strategies that I want to talk about, specifically relating to SMEs and specifically relating to economic crisis. So the first thing that they can do is to develop employee involvement voice mechanisms and use them effectively if they don't have such mechanisms in place already. So voice has been one of the things we have found through recent research that is quite important for businesses to offer. And voice can mean two different things. If we look into the literature, voice can be about allowing employees to express dissatisfaction, and voice can also be about enabling employees to share ideas that would benefit the organization. And these are two different perspectives. And there is a call to bridge the gap in between these two perspectives so that we can start considering voice to be both. And especially in a crisis context, you do want employees to be able to share with you their concerns and their dissatisfactions and their worries. But you also want them to engage in decision making, to bring ideas to the table, to help the organization solve problems that it might be facing with. So if we do have employee involvement voice mechanisms, then we can foster positive employee behaviors, and people will feel able to participate, they will learn, we can create innovation, and there will be a greater receptiveness to change in these organizations. And this is particularly important, as I said, because of the turbulent environment and because of the changes that are happening. If you can involve employees in decision making, that would be of benefit. And you can do this by engaging in a variety of formal and informal voice mechanisms. It really depends on the size of the business and the purpose of voice within the business environment. But you could have, formal mechanisms for enabling employees to take part in decisions, such as through scheduled meetings or speak up programs or self-managed teams or attitude surveys and mechanisms such as these. Or you can have a lot of informal ways of enabling employees to share their ideas, such as informal discussions, informal meetings, open door policy, through line managers, and empowerment as well. In most of the times in SMEs, through research that we have done, we know that they utilize a combination. So there are some formality, but mostly it is informal. It really depends on the size of the business. The larger the size, usually you get to find more formalized voice mechanisms. So this is one thing that businesses can do that is not directly, it's an alternative to costly financial rewards, to utilize employment voice systems, but utilize them effectively. So really listen and really incorporate the comments, the ideas, the concerns, and try to move the business from there. Now, a second area where businesses can really work on relates to work-life balance, because work-life balance has been found to benefit businesses during financial crisis and austerity. And work-life balance is when employees manage to achieve equality between the time they spend working and the time they use in their personal life. And again, the benefits of having work-life balance is motivation, increased retention, reduced absence, attracting new talent as well, and reducing stress. So work-life balance has a lot of benefits here. And in this area, what organizations can do, depending on their size and their particular circumstances, they can look at the flexibility of the working time, offering flexibility, improved maternity, paternity, leave entitlements, things like career breaks, maybe childcare assistance if they can do that. And most of the times, having a flexible menu of benefits is better than offering one thing only, because you have employees at different life stages. So work-life balance expectations will be different depending if they're a younger worker, a midlife worker, or maybe an older worker. So giving an opportunity for people to choose and tap into different types of flexible benefits in terms of work-life balance, I think would really help. And the third thing that we have uncovered through this kind of recent research that we have done, that SMEs can specifically do in times of crisis, is to have an organizational culture that is supporting personal and professional development. So we have found, like, if you offer voice, work-life balance, and this supportive culture, you are likely to have improved performance. And this is because employees are likely to be more motivated, more satisfied in the workplace, even though there is a very turbulent external environment happening. So obviously, to design and implement a supportive organizational culture, we're talking about small companies. So the owner or manager is pivotal here. Sometimes the owner is the manager in smaller companies. Where you have bigger structures, it's not just about the owner creating the vision for the culture, but line managers are also very important in implementing this kind of vision, because they are the ones dealing with teams directly. So the approach that the owner takes to the culture, to this personal and professional development in the company, needs to filter through. And where small companies have an HR function, especially in the larger size of SMEs, where there is an HRM function, it can also act as an additional mechanism to advise and assist in the implementation of a positive culture. And how you can do it? First of all, we need the vision, we need the owner to back up this kind of change in culture. If the change is not, the culture is not already there. We want to consider line managers and their skills. So can they support this type of culture? Do we need to train line managers? How about leadership styles and management styles? If you want to have a supportive culture, you need a culture that encourages staff participation, develops team working, promotes autonomy, and promotes communication. Otherwise, it's going to be too much of a command control culture, and it's going to be counterproductive to what we're trying to achieve here. So these were three strategies, elements, if you like, of the working environment that are relevant to SMEs in a turbulent context, potentially helping businesses overcome of this size, overcome the external turbulence. And I think that when we think about rewarding employees, we shouldn't be thinking just about financial rewards. Smaller companies cannot really offer great financial rewards in a turbulent environment. They can offer even less in terms of financial rewards, but it's the other elements of the working environment that might help, such as voice, such as work-life balance, and such as a supportive organizational culture for development. Now, I want to finish with a thought here as well, because in this talk, I spoke mainly about employees, SMEs and their employees, but there is a need to start thinking about workers as a wider category of people in an employment relationship within the organization. And this is, I'm leading a guest, a special issue in Human Resource Management Journal at the minute. We are asking for contributions, and hopefully the issue will be published soon, and everyone can have a look at the latest research in this. Because we have not just full-time employees in organizations anymore. We have part-timers, we have fixed-term employees, we have temporary employees, we have zero-hour employees, and then, of course, we have self-employed and freelancers. And there is a gray area there. It really depends on how you're working with this type of workers. And there's an argument to be made that if you are relying on some of these freelancers, often or frequently, you need to think about how you can also incorporate them into what you offer to employees or workers affiliated with your organization as well. And all these different workers will be experiencing crisis differently. Of course, there are challenges when you are a full-time employee, but when you are a freelancer, it becomes even more difficult. If you're on a zero-hour contract, the insecurity is even more severe, and the same for temporary workers and so on. So there's a need to think about other types of workers when we're thinking about the employee experience. I think we need to be thinking about the worker experience to incorporate the wide range of workers in organizations these days. And also to say that I spoke about the financial crisis and COVID-19, so economic crisis and recessions, but there are different types of crises as well happening: social crisis, political crisis. that are affecting employees in one way or another, or workers in one way or another. Brexit, one example of a political social crisis. Um, and for us to think about, how might that be affecting our workers, and what can we do to improve the experience that they have within our organizations. So I hope this is a nice kind of overview of what SMEs can do in terms of supporting employees and workers, during a time of recession. I have my contact details here. My publication record is there on the web link. And I'm more than happy to take your questions and your thoughts. And Neil, I'm more than happy to come back to you now.
Thank you so much, Rea. That was brilliant, really, really insightful. It is time for questions. If you have a question that you would like to ask Rea, I'd like to encourage you to please pop your camera on, and we'll work our way through those, and we'll go one by one. If you are more comfortable doing so, you can pop it in the chat box, but it'd be really great to get some kind of like live conversation going. I can see Dominic's joined us on screen. Rea, I have a quick question to get us started, if that's okay. So my question is around rewards versus well-being. I think that there has been a tendency to try and fill a well-being void with rewards. And I think that people just want to work at a normal, reasonable capacity. So giving extra days off and rewards, I think, is somewhat misguided in many places. What would your response be to that?
Absolutely. I think that's a very interesting point. I think from a total rewards perspective, I mean, the total rewards model resembles a little bit the well-being model we've looked at the lecture, in that it combines financial and non-financial rewards. And the idea that employees are only motivated through financial rewards, I think we've come a long way away from that, to realize that it's not just the money that matter, but it's the range of other elements of the work environment that also matter. For example, voice, participation, work-life balance, flexibility in how you do, supportive managers, and leaders. And I think in the case of our lecture here and our discussion, the problem is that they can't offer financial rewards. Most of the time, smaller companies, if they can offer financial rewards, of course, I think they should be considered in relation to a range of other benefits as well that would be offered as part of the work environment, and not, they people have different needs. People are at different life stages. People are affected differently from the external environment. So offering one approach, one strategy only, may it be financial rewards or any other type of reward, is likely to capture a small portion of your employees. And the best thing that you can do is offer a variety of options to choose from, and that you are able to satisfy a bigger proportion of your workforce, if you like.
Thank you. And in terms of kind of like, authentically looking at someone at well-being, kind of how would you kind of encourage SMEs to do that?
Authentically looking at well-being. I think we have to realize that it's a win-win situation, and maybe most of the leaders sometimes are hesitant on implementing all these tools because they don't see the benefit, but the benefit there is clear. As a business, you are relying on your people 100%. You can have the technology, you can have the greatest product, the greatest service. If your employees, your workers, are not giving you 100% of their commitment and their productivity, you are likely to fail. So in very, very, very simple words. So it is a win-win situation. If you enable employees to feel happy and be productive, your business will also benefit. So if you're thinking of well-being, it's a complicated concept. It includes a lot of different components. And I think as a business, you need to look at what elements you could potentially work on. How much would it cost? Everything costs something. Maybe it's management time to implement. Maybe it's a direct cost to implement. I think you need to think about what could you implement. And the best way to do it, voice comes into this as well. It is advisable that you don't decide on your own without checking what your employees would find useful to have. So you don't need to rush and implement things to show that you're doing great things, because if you are disconnected from the needs of your workers, you're likely to offer the wrong things and might even have a negative result out of that, because you've missed the point, for example, that half of your workforce is really struggling with childcare. I'm just using an example. So engage in the two-way communication to make this decision. So participation is crucial. If you don't have any well-being um, initiatives, initiate a discussion with your employees, your workers. What is it that they struggle with? What is it that they would find more beneficial? And from those recommendations, you can then identify the ones that you can implement based on a cost analysis.
Thank you. That's a great summary, great approach. Dominic, you had a question for us. Are you happy to join us? Okay, anyone else have a question for Rea? Christina, hiya.
Hi, yes, thank you very much. Very interesting, Rea. I really enjoyed that. You talked about the employee voice before, and I found that really interesting when you talked about the different mechanisms of considering the employee voice. Have you found, or do you think that there's any one mechanism which might or should be preferred to any others, or can be more effective than others?
Absolutely. So it's an interesting question. Thank you very much for this, especially in small companies. In small companies, the most important thing is the line manager and the owner, and their leadership style, their management style, how open they are to listen to anything that the employees would need to share, may it be a complaint, may it be some ideas. And this is because small companies don't have these formalized employment representation systems. Usually they don't have trade unions. They're very informal in the way that they're structured, flat structures versus hierarchical. And many of them, because we've done a lot of research on SMEs, many of the employees talk about a family kind of feeling. But it really depends on the personality of the owner and the kind of management and leadership style. So I think in smaller companies, the informal voice is primarily important. But equally, I cannot omit and say that some kind of formalization would be needed, because things cannot always be resolved informally. Like grievance processes, you could have some kind of grievance processes, but they become problematic because you don't have an HR department, so there's nobody to oversee these type of formalized mechanisms. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Christina. Mike, over to you. Good to see you. Oh, you're on mute, Mike.
Hi, Mike.
Sorry, Mike, you're on mute. There you go.
I suppose an obvious question, Rea, is how does one encourage the leaders of SMEs, whether owners or key line managers, how do you get them to adopt the vision beyond the encouraging words that if they adopt it, they will benefit? I mean, in other words, I suppose I'm looking for levers beyond pure encouragement to create a situation where SMEs are going to see the vision as in their interest to adopt, particularly when obviously their priorities at the moment tend to be in crisis management. I just wondered, for example, whether any of the resources which SMEs use externally to help them in HR, I mean, in the UK, for example, there are quite big HR consultancies that run subscription services from SMEs. I just wonder whether any of these external agents might have a role in providing levers to push the SME owner managers towards the vision. Because I'm a bit worried that unless you have some kind of external intervention, they're not going to adopt the vision quickly enough.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point, because you're right. In small companies, the leader needs to want to create this change, and they need to be convinced that this change will work for them. I mean, there's plenty of evidence research-wise for the benefits of well-being, the benefits of happiness at work, and specifically for smaller companies. You know, there are measurements for productivity, for performance in terms of all these different implementation of HRM ideas, including the ones I've mentioned today. And for consultancies, of course, there's external expertise that SMEs can tap into, but that's quite expensive as well. So they would need to even be convinced to go into and seek external support. So I don't know if I have an easy answer to this. I think for an SME owner, they are always making decisions that would benefit the business in the same way that they would decide to create a new product, stop the production of a new product, expand in a different market, and so on. I think there are some people decisions to be made in the way that you manage your workforce. And I think if the research evidence is there, yes, of course, they have access to external expertise as well to help them implement all of these practices. They need to make a decision whether they value the outcome they're likely to receive, like in any other business decision that they're making.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm on mute now. We have a couple of questions in the chat box from Barbara and John, both relating to rewards. So Barbara asked, are there any frameworks for how to fit rewards to individuals? And John, as a kind of follow-up, what determines employees' preference in determining rewards?
So I think they are very linked questions. I think these two. If we look into motivational theories, because rewards are very much linked with motivational theories, there are so many motivational theories explaining what motivation is and how it occurs as well, the process of it. And the principle behind these theories is that it's quite an individual state. Motivation is an individual state. It is affected by our individual characteristics, our age, our gender, where we come from, our education, our family, our religion. It relates to the current economic environment. It relates to the specific business we're working in, the sector, the size of the business, the owner, the leader that we are working with, and so on. So I think, but generally speaking, the idea of offering flexible rewards is exactly because people will be making their own individual decisions as to what type of reward best matches their needs. There are, studies talking about older workers and mid-career workers and then younger workers as well. Work-life balance becomes more prominent to people that have childcare responsibilities or caring responsibilities as well. And similarly, you can think about who wants training and development more, who wants more money at the beginning of their career. There have been some studies in relation to that, but I don't think we can oversimplify because everybody's individual. You have your own situation, your own kind of particular circumstances. And you cannot really oversimplify. So that's why we offer, ideally, you would offer a variety of rewards so that people can choose from. You want to be excluding anyone.
Thank you. So a flexible approach all round. I mean, I know some people, myself included, I'm not that fussed about rewards. I prefer, recognition and creativity and autonomy are more important to me, but I guess it really does vary. Let's go back to what you were speaking about kind of different levels that people work at. So part-time, 0 hour, temporary. How would you advise and encourage SMEs to develop, create an inclusive approach to how they support staff that are not full-time general staff?
Thank you. That's very interesting, and sometimes it's very difficult to do that. It really depends on the type of worker we are referring to. For example, you have agency workers; they work for you, but they are employed by another organization. So, to what extent can you really influence their experience, if you like, because you're not their direct employer? But I think again, the principle of voice goes a long way. I think we need to be looking away from a conceptualization of employee voice for people within the company towards an external conceptualization of voice to capture periphery, the peripheral kind of workforce as well. You can include them in discussions. You can ask them what they think. You can have specific meetings to discuss the conditions, elements that cause them satisfaction, dissatisfaction, especially if you believe that you rely on this type of workers. I think you're likely to engage in this kind of process if you are relying. So as an example, we know that many universities rely on a big portion of part-time lecturers. I think it would be silly of any university not to acknowledge that this is a big portion of the workforce, and even though they might not be full-time employees, they are recruited on an hourly basis, but they are relying on their performance. So it's quite important that they are also experiencing an organization in a positive manner. And in the same way, you can think about fixed term, temporary, 0-hour project workers that you might be constantly kind of working with, and that might be periphery or might be core periphery. They might be your core workforce as well. So I think you need to make a decision as a business owner to the extent to which you are relying on different types of workers, and how can you bring them in by opening a dialogue, opening the lines of communication, and inviting them to share views.
Thank you so much. And then final point, you used a really interesting term, command and control culture. What would be your kind of like advice or thoughts around as we move back to kind of like lockdown measures lifting, social distancing lifting slightly, kind of managers in particular, leadership kind of like trying to really force people back into offices and working environments? Obviously COVID's going to have a massive impact on people, how they've been working. What would your advice be kind of like moving forwards as people kind of like as things return to normality?
Absolutely. That's very, very interesting. I think we need to make a separation in between of regulations coming from the legal environment and imposed on businesses. I think employees and workers are very smart, and I think you can easily distinguish what you need to do, because not even your employer has an option to rather than to implement what is being asked of them due to government, let's say, regulations. And you can separate the point where your employer starts controlling and imposing what you do without consultation, without any kind of input from your behalf. And it's very counterproductive. It kills motivation. I mean, we know this kind of the nice equation: motivation, satisfaction, performance, productivity. I mean, we all need to go back to this kind of mainstream equation that we've been learning, and teaching in classes as well. So I think there is an opportunity here to involve employees. Of course, you need to do what the government says, and people will understand that, if it is a regulation, then they have to go with this. But it is an opportunity, I think, for businesses to create a more inclusive culture, to say and have a discussion and open the dialogue about what do employees want, what do they need. And it's a health issue, and it's a stress issue as well. People are very stressed to go back. They are afraid, vaccine or no vaccine. Not everybody has been vaccinated. You have to get vaccinated every year. So the danger is still there. And I think now is the time to openly engage with employees on this respect, because you can gain more commitment and more satisfaction, more motivation, more productivity in the year to come if you do that.
Thank you so much. We are coming to the end. Do you have any final words for our audience today? It could be inspirational thoughts or
inspirational thoughts. Yes. I think the only thing that I would say is that owners and managers have a lot of power over employees and workers, and they have the power to make the experience of work very positive, or on the contrary, the power to make it very negative. So I would ask that we take a step back and just think about the approach to people management in smaller organizations. What is it that we would like to achieve in terms of a culture, and to engage with the workforce so that we can support this type of culture.
Fantastic. What a fantastic note to finish on. Thank you so much, Rea. Thank you to all of our audience for joining us today. Fantastic to see you. And we look forward to seeing you at our next event. The 9th of June, Data in Funny Places, and the 7th of July, Rethinking the Sustainability of Our UK Universities. And I will pop a link to register for those in the chat box. Rea, fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.